I'm your host, Adam Messer, and my special guest today is Carol James Marshall. And Carol, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Welcome to the show, everybody. Carol is an author, and Carol, you write all kinds of like scary, spooky horror stuff, don't you?
Yeah, I write horror. It's sci-fi horror. A lot of my stuff is sci-fi and horror mixed together.
Yeah,
So I'm one of those alien obsessed type of people. But I do write, different types of horror. But a lot of it is sci-fi oriented.
that's awesome. All right, everybody, stay tuned. Hold on for just a second here. I'm going to play the little intro. Welcome to the Adam Messer Show. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and I interview authors, artists, and entertainers. We discuss their process, how they overcome obstacles, and their creative works. I hope you enjoy the show. All right, everybody, and today in the studio with me is my son, Sebastian Messer. Carol, he always plays some heavy metal for me, so I'm going to have him play a little bit for us,
Awesome.
and then we're going to start the conversation.
All right, cool. Great.
All right, take it away, Sebastian. That was awesome, Sebastian. Thank you. Yeah, Carol, he has a band called Krieger. So one of the cool things about having the show is I asked him if he would play some music for me live. I just think it's I like heavy metal myself, and I was always kind of like a neat addition to the show. So thank you,
No,
Bass.
that's great. We're a very big music family here. With I can't tell you how many guitars. We actually have a music room. My
Oh,
son
really?
plays the bass. My son plays about 4 or 5 instruments. My husband plays guitar too, and we are metalheads. But I will say I'm an old punk at heart. I'm more on
Hmm.
like the social distortion.
Yeah,
That's a little bit more me. But I love metal,
that's
so that's
cool.
cool.
Okay, so I'm gonna just read your bio off of Amazon real quick.
Okay.
And it's Carol James Marshall is a lover of all things that go bump in the night. Marshall is an avid
Yeah.
reader of science fiction, dystopian, and all things dark humor. She's a California native that now lives in Georgia with her husband, 2 children, and a spoiled chocolate lab named Cupcake. Marshall's library of works consists of the Women of the Grey trilogy, The Demon Dealer, a horror novel, and a variety of short stories. Want to know more about Carol James? Go on to her fan club. You have your new release too. It's called Ella, right?
Yeah, and I was, just as you were saying that, I was like, oops, I really need to update that because I've had 2 new releases in the past three
Yeah.
months. I know I'm a horror author, but I also have a memoir called Barflies. I was a bartender in this
Mm.
outlandish, crazy outlaw bar in the middle of the California desert. I was a bartender there for 3 years, and I had the time of my life. And
Oh gosh.
I wrote about bartending there. It was a very eccentric place, kind of outlaw type of place.
Yeah, I'm looking
Had
at the
its own
cover of
set
that
of
right
rules.
now. I like the
Yeah,
neon.
yeah, barflies. So I have that, and I also have Ella. Ella is my science fiction horror novel, new release, and so I really need to update that bio.
Oh, you
But
know
you
what?
said,
That's one of the things being an indie that there's always something to update or to do. I was doing mine last night, and I was like, I need to change this up a little bit because I was updating my website, and I think that's
mhm,
as an indie author, we're constantly having to
it
update and do things.
truly
Yeah.
truly never ends.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
list of because you're your own business. You are it. You are the
Hmm.
CEO, the boss, the worker, the janitor. You're everything. So you have to do everything. And the list, and I like it like that. I'm indie by choice, but the list never ends. So it just goes on and on and on
Yeah,
and
it
on.
does. It's like, oh gosh. I mean, and it doesn't. Sometimes it does. Well, to me, it doesn't feel like the kind of work that just grinds you down. It just feels like it's a grind where, it's just something that has to be done. I don't really, get any kind of pleasure or any kind of reward or whatever. It's just more about like, okay, well, I'm just tweaking my brand. I'm tweaking, my presentation, because sometimes this is the only shot that you have, right? To
Yeah,
say, hey,
exactly.
this is my calling card. This is my business card. You know,
And I think, and you and I are very like-minded about our authorship and things that we do. You always want to get better. Like
yeah.
every book I write, I want my next book to be better. So that book, I want my next book to be better, and the other book, I want my next book to be better. So if I have a blurb, I want my next
This
blurb to
is
be better.
this is a strange thing. We actually have a caller calling in. Let me see.
Go ahead, answer.
I've
Why
never
not?
had a caller before,
All
so
right, cool.
all right. Let me see. I'm not really even sure how to do this. WRUU. WRUU. How do you, I'm not really sure how to do this, Dr. Dave. Oh, okay. WRUU. You're live on air.
Adam,
Yes.
Orlando.
Hey, Orlando.
Your guest isn't in the program. No one can hear what he or she is saying.
Oh gosh.
Okay, I'm going to hang up and I'll keep monitoring. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Give me just a second here, Carol. I am so sorry. They're saying
No
that
problem.
he was saying that it wasn't broadcasting your side of the story. So
Oh, wow. I'm really glad he
I got
called.
it. Thank you, Dr. Dave. Yeah, everybody, I'm so sorry for that. I'm glad Orlando Montoya called us. Luckily, you'll be able to catch that first part on the podcast later on because it was recording, so you'll be able to catch that. But everybody tuning in, you've been listening to a one-sided conversation. My guest today is Carol James Marshall. That's the beauty of community radio.
Yeah.
It's not all polished and perfect. Carol, I am so sorry. Can you go back and just do a little bit of an intro for yourself again for the people
Yeah.
that are still tuning in?
Yeah, no problem. I'm Carol James Marshall. I'm a California native that now lives in Warner Robins, and I am a horror author. I do mostly sci-fi horror, but I do have books that are just horror. I also have a memoir, so I'm a little bit of a mix. I'm a horror author that has a sprinkle of sci-fi in her books, and I also have a memoir.
Hmm.
Let's see, what else did we go
We were
through?
talking about barflies and that you were out there for a couple of years
Yes,
and
in my 20s, I am now, not 20s, but in my 20s, I was a bartender at an outlaw type of love shack bar in the middle of the California desert. And this place was an outlaw bar. It had really, really eccentric characters, and it had its own.
mm,
It was just like this own little planet, and it was
hmm.
just the coolest place. And I wrote a memoir about it called Barflies. And a lot of people might read Barflies and think she's making that up. No, I'm not. It's 100% real people, real situations.
Oh
It's
wow.
100% nonfiction. Everything that happened that I wrote about in the memoirs is true. At the same time that I was a bartender there, I was also a bartender at a very posh golf resort where I did like weddings for NFL people and really rich people, and the comparison between this outlaw bar and the rich resort and the situations that I went through in both in just my 3 years as a bartender.
Mm,
It's if you liked, I will say, if you liked Kitchen Confidential by
hmm.
Anthony Bourdain,
Oh
that's
yeah,
kind of what Barflies. Barflies is
that
the
was one of my
Kitchen
favorite
Confidential
shows.
of bartenders.
I
That's what
loved
it
his
is.
No Reserves, No Reservation, I think it was called.
I'm not gonna lie, a huge Bourdain fan, and I
Yeah.
was very upset the day that he passed. He has his reasons, but you know, gosh, I was and still am a huge Bourdain fan. His other works, his other books are absolutely astounding. He was an incredible writer.
Yeah, I
So
totally
I,
agree with you. I think the way he started off was pretty awesome. I mean, like he just worked through the I guess the front line or whatever, and had all these crazy stories, and then he traveled, and he actually did jujitsu. That was one of the things that I picked up with. I started doing jujitsu in 2011, and I've not been like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I did it for consistency for like a year or so, maybe a year and a half, 2 years at the most, and then I tried to do it again, but Anthony Bourdain was doing it, and I love the fact that he did that. But you see that a lot with not just celebrities, but just in suicide and in general, people that they seem like everything, they're constantly working on things, and they're constantly doing things, and they're successful in different things, but you never know.
Never know what's behind
you never
the
know.
curtain.
Yeah.
You just never. I mean, and that's if we think about it, like a lot of people have this misconception about horror authors. Like horror authors were all like goths. We all sleep in coffins, and
right.
we watch like Saw 24/7 and stuff like that. And I, from my experience, horror authors are some of the nicest people. It's not like that. And I think just people have certain stereotypes. And if they see somebody that's happy all the time, like Bourdain or traveling, they don't see what's behind the curtain. And it's the same with horror authors. I think horror authors are some of the nicest people, but you read our work and we're creepy and we're scary, but maybe it's because we get all our demons out on paper. I
think the fiction part of it is, and I'm just still kind of dipping my toes into it. This is actually our annual pledge drive time of the year, Carol. So I need to do like a little bit of a pledge drive. So
Sure.
Everybody, this is WRU 107.5, and I'm Adam Messer. This is the Adam Messer Show, and today we're talking with Carol James Marshall. She is a horror author, as she just said. And coming up, we're going to be talking more about writing and things like that. So stay tuned here on WRU 107.5 FM. This is the only place on your radio dial where you're going to hear anything like this show and other programs that we have here on WRU. During our on-air membership campaign, I'm asking you to support WRUU and the Adam Messer Show with a donation to WRUU. So why do that? Why put that out there? Well, WRUU is an all-community, volunteer-based radio station. We don't have government funding. We don't have commercials. We are 100% listener-supported by people like you listening. We have diverse programming. Our hosts are independent. We don't have people telling us, this is what you have to talk about on your show. It's, we, the hosts, we come up with our programming, and once it's approved by the board, we go with it. So that's one of the things that I love. Being part of the Savannah's only community radio station, we're independent, and there aren't any other stations like us in Savannah. So we rely heavily on you for your support. No one else can do it for us but you. If you're enjoying the programs that we offer, check us out on WRUU.org. It's super easy to make a donation. It only takes a minute to go on to WRUU.org and hit the donate button. It's affordable. You can pick the amount. You're in the driver's seat with that. You don't have to have a certain amount because every dollar helps us. And I just want to let you know, too, with that, just to close up here with the pledge drive part, you're going to be hearing a lot about it the next couple weeks. But if you pledge $5 a month, I mean, what's that, a cup of coffee? That's $60 a year. If you do $10 a month, that's $120 a year. If you do $20 a month, that's $240 a year. If you're already a donor right now, consider doubling your donation, or consider adding on to your monthly donation. And one of the cool things that we're doing this year that I really enjoy, last year we had the t-shirts. This year, if you do the $107.50 or more one-time gift, or the $10 or more per month gift, you get a WRUU travel tumbler, which is a 16-ounce hot or cold beverage container with the WRUU logo on it. So don't act later on. Don't wait. I say go on there right now and go on WRUU.org, hit that donate button, and show us your love and join the WRUU family. We really appreciate you. We couldn't do this without your support. So thank you, everybody. All right, Carol. I know that was kind of a long thing, but it's so important.
I understand.
That's how we are able to do shows like this. And I love being able to talk with people like yourself who are creative, You know, we talk with authors and artists and entertainers on this show. And, you know, like you were saying earlier, I think I might have been cut off, but you have to hustle. You have to get out there and you have to do your thing, right? I mean,
Yeah, as an indie author, you have
mm-hmm,
to, no one's looking out for your authorship but yourself. And a lot of people don't understand this. Also, traditional authors. I've met a lot of traditional authors that, traditional being that they are with a publishing house
mm-hmm.
that also have to hustle, that
Oh, yeah.
so it's just a continual hustle, a continual, not fight, but you're always working on improving, or you're always working on trying to get people to know about you, or to know about your art, know
I
about what you're
I do think
doing,
it's a fight. I do. I would agree with you on
Yeah.
that because you have to fight for it. I mean, if it's something you want and you really love, I mean, like I was just looking at. I'll be honest with you. You know, I'm always talking to different indies, and I was just looking at your authorship page on Amazon,
Hmm.
and you know, you have hardcovers of your books. I'm
Yes,
like,
I do.
that's kind of cool. You know,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another step on what I'd like to do with my with my stuff.
All right. So I'm gonna send you an email, and I'm gonna give you a step by step on how to do that.
See, this
So
is everybody. This is literally how it works. If you want to be an author, this is how it works. You talk with other authors, you talk with other people, and you're like, you know what? I like that thing that you're doing. Can you please share with me? And
yeah.
I tell you, Carol, I have noticed that almost probably everybody that I've ever talked with, at least in the author community, will share resources. They will share. They might not necessarily promote your stuff, but they will share resources with you.
Yeah, the indie author community, we're all in this fight together,
Mm-hmm.
and for the most part, I mean, you do have, your black cats out there, which is like indie author talk for people that do, scammy things or bad things. But we all have a passion for being writers, and for writing books, and for creating.
We know how hard
And
it is
it,
and how soul
we
crushing it can be.
Exactly. So it's almost like a village. It's a community.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned early on when I started my indie authorship is I was very green. I knew absolutely nothing. But early on, I learned that it's very important to make connections with other authors, because you're going to learn a lot from the other authors. But also, it's important to share what you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because sharing with other authors and helping them helps you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't rise to the top by just being on your own. You have to, I don't know how to put it exactly, but I just believe in helping other authors. It makes me really happy to share whatever knowledge I have. It's a really hard struggle
And
to
not
get
one
yourself
path is right
known.
for everybody. I mean,
Yes,
like what works for
exactly.
one author does not necessarily mean it's going to work for someone else. You
Yeah,
can
and
duplicate it, but you can't just say, "Well, I'm going to do exactly what Carol James Marshall does," because then people know it's a copy. You know, you
yeah,
have to adopt it for
exactly.
yourself.
And it's just like advertising. Some people will get on a bandwagon. Well, if they advertise this way, it helped this guy or this girl, so I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
do it exactly like them. But your audience is completely different. It's each each writer has a certain voice,
Mm-hmm.
and that will appeal to some readers and not appeal to other readers.
Yeah.
And what works for Joe Schmo is not going to necessarily work for you. You have to
Yes.
educate yourself as much as you possibly can, and then glean from there what you think would suit yourself. There's a lot of things out there in the author community that is considered the standard of things that you should do.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them I just choose not to do. One of the things about me is I write horror, but I don't write just primarily in a series or primarily in certain characters. I write the story that comes to me.
Yeah.
I was actually asked that by an indie author a couple weeks ago. She and I were chatting, and she goes, one of the things that confused her about my authorship is that I don't have a very long, prolonged series with a defined genre like fantasy with angels or werewolves or that.
Right.
I'm kind of eclectic. I have a little bit of sci-fi. I have the demon dealer, which is paranormal, which has to do with demons. And I told her, well, I just kind of I break the rules in that sense that I write what I want to write. I write the story that comes to me.
Yeah.
And that might not work for everybody, but maybe writing in a certain genre works for other people. It's so diverse.
Well, a lot
It's
of
just
people
really
write
hard
to
to pinpoint.
market. Like there are a lot of people that
Yeah.
write to market, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you look back at even like guys like Charles Dickens and other classical authors, they wrote to market. I mean, even Shakespeare wrote to market, because that's what they did as their profession, and they were writing for their audience. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot of, I see a lot of trendy stuff today, and especially kind of being an outsider coming into this, I see a lot of people that jump on, trend A and trend B and trend C, and and then they change their writing to tap into that readership. They'll even create new fake pen names and stuff like that, or pseudonyms or whatever, just to be able to tap into that little hot topic or whatever it is.
Yeah, what's going on at that moment.
Yeah, and that's really not for me either. I mean, like I wrote that short story, The Blood Thresher, The Devil's in the Metal, because I like vampires, but I also like sci-fi, and I like zombie stuff, and but I also like nonfiction. So I kind of follow that same suit that I write about what I like to write about. Right now, I have a short story that's coming out in an anthology later on this month called Stories We Tell After Midnight. And Rachel Brune is the editor for, she's got her Chrome Girls Press. And that's a short story, horror story. And it's not sci-fi and it's not fantasy. It's just kind of like, based off of a what if scenario.
Yeah.
And it's set in modern world. It's set in today's, world. So there's a lot of different things I feel like that you can write as far as, a terrifying story of horror.
And that's very true when it comes to horror. Horror is not one thing. Horror is not one genre. Horror is just, it's so diverse. There's so many different types of aspects and types of horror. And what's horror for one person might not be horror for another. I think sometimes people put like a little cookie cutter into horror. Like horror should be a certain way. It's either gore or nothing, or it's jump scares or nothing.
Well,
and that's not what it is.
Well, I had a learning experience with that too. Where I thought the ending that I wrote was like a horror ending, and my editor was like, "No, I need you to change this because my ending was more like a thriller ending." And so I learned that too, because to me, like you said, it goes across a lot of different genres, but I think horror and romance are similar in that vein, that horror can cross across many different elements of life. And romance, it's the same thing. Like you can have sci-fi romance, you can have horror romance, you can have fantasy romance, you can have everyday romance. Horror and romance, you can do just about anything you want with it. So
just yesterday I was working on some of my advertising, and I was going into spoiler alert, my character Ella, and Ella is one of many, is a reptilian. So I'm going over my my ads, and I'm looking up lizard people for my ads.
That's no offense against any of the reptile people that are listening right now. Wink, wink.
There was there's reptilian romance. I have no idea. You know what I mean? So romance is one of those things, like you said, it can go almost. I wish I could write romance. I really do, because romance.
I thought about like doing a pseudonym just because I was like, romance is the biggest market out there, but I don't know.
Romance readers are whale readers. They're serial readers.
Yeah.
I have tried. I'm horrible at romance.
You'd have to have like 10 books just to go ahead and get started, because if they have one book and that's all you have, they're like, you better be publishing every 2 weeks.
They're whale readers. What's considered like a whale reader, with a person that reads like several books a week. Yeah. And they are serial readers.
They're awesome readers.
Yeah, they're awesome, and they're awesome, an awesome fan group. I wish I could write for them, but I cannot. I have tried. When I try to write romance, somebody gets possessed, somebody gets gutted, somebody gets killed, something gets
There's no happily ever after in horror.
And there's no happily ever after at all, ever, with me. And I think that's something that you have to tell yourself as an author. Maybe going back to writing to market, if I could write to market, I would probably write sci-fi romance, because romance sells, and I love sci-fi.
Hey, Dr. Dave, can I give you a shout out while you're here? I'm sorry, Carol. Dr. Dave is our station manager. Let me pot you up real quick, Dr. Dave.
Hey, how you doing?
Let's see. I got it. Okay, I've got you on.
Pop me up a little bit.
Yeah, let me pot you up.
I'm a little bit quiet.
How you doing today?
Just fine.
You just got back in from your travels, right?
Yeah. Was at the Fresh Grass Festival, and before that was in Scotland, actually, for a couple festivals.
Yeah, everybody, this is a rare opportunity. I get to see Dr. Dave on the show, but Dr. Dave is like one of the main driving forces for WRUU. You're a station manager. You're like the first guy that
Studio manager is actually my title, but
studio manager. But we're talking about the annual pledge earlier. Do you have any words that you'd like to share about it while you're just poking in for a second?
Well, the fact that we're an all volunteer station, including me, and I'm here quite a bit. Every time I say that I'm retired, my wife starts cracking up because I spend a lot of time here and do a lot of things for the station.
Yeah.
But we're all volunteer. We're all volunteer. So there's none of that money that comes in goes to paying people.
Right.
Which is generally the salaries are the highest part of any operation. Everything we do goes directly back into the station in terms of equipment. I was just in the back working on our new alternate recording studio.
Yeah.
And so
that's thanks to the donations of our listeners.
That's thanks to donations of our listeners.
Yeah.
Exactly. And an operation, we have to pay the electrical bill. We have to pay we have air conditioning in here to save not only the hosts, who are very important to me, but also the equipment that's very important to me.
Yeah.
And so all of that comes directly from donations, and to pay for the electricity, to pay for the other pieces of equipment that we use.
The internet.
We do have a full-time. We do have a engineer that is on. It's not an employee. We go out and get his services when we need them. All of those things come from donations, and we need about $2,000 a month to operate.
Yeah.
And so that's,
every dollar counts.
Every dollar counts.
I know a lot of times people think like, I can't really donate a lot. It doesn't, a dollar won't really help, or $5 won't help, but it literally does help.
And every dollar will help. And if you can't, but really, if you have a few dollars to throw together every month, you could give that on a regular basis every month, and it really adds up.
Yeah.
Because you give $10 every month, that's $120. That means you're a
serious
$107
the serious fan level,
fan level, and you will get your $107.50 mug. No, I'm just joking.
The WRUU, the tumbler.
You get the tumbler.
Yeah, and we have like the other day we had the kickoff party at Starland, the new food truck park.
Yeah,
Starland Yard. And so I love being part of the station. So I just want to tell you, thanks a lot, Dr. Dave, for for all that you do and everything that you're constantly working. Even everybody, listen, even when he was out of town on vacation, he was still checking in with us, still making sure we're doing okay and answering emails and things like that. So you're a trooper, Dr. Dave. I thank you very much.
Listening when I can, but it was a 5-hour difference between Europe and here. So I did relatively little primetime listening. Yeah.
Everybody, you can go on to WRUU.org and click on that donate button. Thanks, Dr. Dave. We'll see you later. All right. So that was just kind of a neat little sidebar there, Carol.
No problem. I understand.
Yeah, I didn't realize he was back there. We have in our studio, it's a small little studio here on Harris Street. And we have like a tiny little, it's almost like a closet little room in the back of the station. And they're building one of the things that we had an issue with was the recording space, being able to like record shows and stuff like that. And so one of the goals was to be able to add on, just a small side recording area. So that's one of the things that he's working on, trying to finish that up so that, just another resource that, our listeners are providing for us. And, I love the fact that the listeners are so engaged. It's like with your readership and your audience, the people that listen to you or the people that like reading your stuff, it's just built, like you said earlier, it's about building those relationships with people. So
I'm a bit of a documentary nerd, and I'm listening to you guys, and I'm listening to Dr. Dave, and I'm like, oh, this would make a good docu-series.
Oh yeah, I totally agree.
I would really watch a docu-series on this radio station. You know what I mean? It would sound really interesting to me. I'm a big documentary type person. So
and we're here in Savannah, Georgia, so we are one of the top film areas in the state of Georgia. And so, yeah, if you're out there, everybody, and there's a documentary videographer or
there's
producer,
a story there.
Yeah, come do it. Yeah, we would love it.
There is a story there.
There definitely is.
I'm like, there's a story there. There's something there, you know.
Shoot, Carol, I might just launch my own documentary thing just because that's such a cool idea. I might just do like a little YouTube series. Well, I have the background in interviewing people. Yeah, I do have the background with working with the newspaper, but I've never done a docuseries. But I love documentaries too. I love like nonfiction stuff.
I love nonfiction. I love documentaries. Can I tell you about the scariest documentary I've ever seen?
Oh yeah, please do.
It's called The Nightmare. It's on Netflix. It's all about sleep paralysis. And being a horror author and being a person that loves horror and creepy things, I don't scare easy. This documentary made me, like, I was unsettled for days after watching this documentary. And you're going to watch this documentary maybe in the future, and you're going to think to yourself, I don't know if all that's true, because it is a documentary and it is, it's nonfiction, but oh man, it's called The Nightmare. It's on Netflix. It's kind of old, but it's all about sleep paralysis. It is creepy.
I'll tell you what.
That's my Halloween shout out to everybody. Watch The Nightmare.
The Nightmare. That's awesome. Well, I was actually gonna play one of the pledge things, but Dr. Dave came in, so I'll do the pledge thing at the 45-minute mark. So we'll do that there. Tell me more about how you got into writing, and what attracted you to horror. Are you like me and you were like a horror movie fan growing up, or?
Oh yeah.
Did you like reading a lot of horror movie or horror books or scary books when you grew up?
You know what? I wasn't much of a horror reader growing up. I was very obsessed with the Twilight Zone, and I was obsessed with shows like V for Victory.
Yeah.
As we're going back, and
actually, Aliens,
Ella Aliens. Ella is actually my nod to that 1980s miniseries.
I was wondering with the lizard people.
I was a very big and at the end of Ella, I write a whole thing about how that's my tribute to that 1980s thing. As for writing, I have always been a writer my whole life. I've just always, I think writing is a compulsion almost. It's like we can't help ourselves. We will write because we just have to. And I wrote several books and I threw them in the trash. I would write them and then I would throw them away. And then finally, my first book that I released called Starburst was my third book that I had written. And I got brave enough to show it to my boss and close friend. And I showed it to her and I was like, this is terrible, but just read it. It's just terrible. And she's like, no, this is really good. Keep writing. And then I was like, okay. So I'd write a little bit more and I'd say the same thing to her. Here's the next part. I know it's horrible. And she's like, no, it's not. And she encouraged me to actually take it seriously. So once I was done with my first book, Starburst, I said, you know what? I'm going to do something with this. I'm actually going to, instead of throwing it in the trash, which is what I've done with my other books, I'm going to take myself seriously and I'm going full forward. And I got myself a professional editor, and then I started to learn about publishing and everything I wanted to do. And it almost became an affliction. Like now I can't help myself. I write a book and I finish it and then I start another book, So I think I'm at 6 books now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's 3 books in my trilogy, probably about like 5 or 6 books into it now. But that's what started it. It was just me. I just can't help myself. And I think that a lot of writers out there hearing this will feel the same. It's like you can't help yourself but write. And if I don't have time to write during the week, I actually get kind of cranky. And I get mad, and I understand that, hey, I have to go and sit down and write. It's like the best therapy ever.
Yeah, I've been going through this year for me has been a big growing curve. I started, I've been writing since I was a kid too, And but I started wanting to write fiction. Actually, it was weird. I looked back at an old flash drive that I had, and I forgot that I had started a story back in like 2010, 2011. And I found it on this old flash drive, and I was reading it. I was like, oh, this is just ugh.
Yeah.
And but I started writing for the paper, for Savannah Morning News to Savannah in 2014, and I would write articles. I'd do interviews with people, and so it was published work. It was paid work, and I really enjoyed it. Some of the things I started doing were covering these conventions, and I met some different indie authors. One of the first indie authors I ever actually interviewed was a guy named Josh Vasquez, who he wrote the Savannah Zombie novel series, and he's a friend of mine. And I would just pick his brain and ask him, and we talked about his book at the time when it was released. I think it was called A New Death, and this is like 2014. It's like one of the first articles I'd written or whatever. And it just kind of struck me like, oh, wow, look at this indie work. You can actually publish a book. You can actually, have a physical, book in your hand that you wrote. And so I would talk to different indie authors, and I would, buy and support their work, and, and I'd read their books when I could. Honestly, the last 20 or so years, I've only mutually exclusively read books on leadership and management, self-development, those kind of things, nonfiction stuff. But when I started going to these conventions, I would pick up an indie author, book, and I would read it or whatever. And it was hard for me to read fiction. I mean, it was very difficult because as a kid, I was one of those whale readers. I didn't know that's what I was, but I was reading, I was reading like a 300, 400 word book, 300, 400 page book in a day or so when I was a kid. I was constantly reading, but that's when I had, nothing else to do and no, adult life. And I wrote a novel like 2014. I wrote a novel in 2015. I finished it. It took me like 12 months to finish it because I was just writing when I was still learning like a process, right? Yeah. And I sent it to a friend of mine, and they read it, and it was just one of those things where I didn't hear back from them, and then like a month goes by, 2 months goes by, and I finally was like, hey, did you have a chance to read it? Yes, I read it. I was like, oh, well, what did you think? He was like, I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want to say anything. I was like, just tell me. He was like, it's not very good. And I was like, oh gosh. So that, and we talked, and, he thought that, the story had some bones to it, and, had an idea, but he just didn't like it. And then it was weird because that kind of set me back, and not him, but just the fact that I was like, oh, well, here's a guy that I respect. It just kind of set me back. I didn't do anything with writing, and then maybe a year after that, I started thinking about like a vampire story. I was like, I've always liked vampires, and I've always liked horror movies and stuff like that. And I was like, well, maybe I can write a short story. So I started doing this. What I wanted to do was kind of like the lore of Savannah, Georgia. There's not really anything about vampires, in Savannah. And I was like, let me do some digging and find out, if there's any kind of like historical references, because back then there's like they didn't know the difference between like, if it was real or not, supernatural or not. And so I started writing these little stories, kind of like a historical fiction type thing. And my son last year, actually Josh Vasquez was on the show again, and my son Sebastian afterwards, he was like, Dad, why don't you write a story about a heavy metal vampire band that comes to Savannah? Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
6 weeks later, I'm publishing, Blood Thresher, The Devil's in the Metal, and that's a wink and a nod to back in the 80s when they were like, heavy metal was the devil's music.
Yeah.
I was like, so
Ozzy was biting the head off bats and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that was one of those things where I was like, but the whole thing about where you said you feel like cranky or whatever from not writing.
Mm-hmm.
So this year I have been going through like a learning process and I've been listening to different audiobooks and reading different things about writing. And, obviously I've been doing the show, talking to different authors and stuff like that. But I've been trying to figure out what works for me because of my work schedule and my home life. And, I've got school that I do, and it's not easy.
Difficult. It's kind of difficult sometimes. You have to find the right process for yourself.
Yeah.
I tried that. I took a couple years off work when I first moved to Warner Robins from California. I was really burnt out. I was really tired, and I wanted to write full time. So I took a couple years off, and I put myself on a writing schedule, and I wrote my horror novel, The Demon Dealer, on a writing schedule. I was going to write so many hours a day, and I was going to publish at this point, blah, 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 blah. And through that process, I figured out that does not work for me. That is not me. So that's not my process. I don't write every day. I get a itch, and I go and I write a couple paragraphs, or I write a couple chapters, and then I come back. I'm a sporadic writer. I cannot sit and write for 2 to 3 hours at a time. I can sit and write for about 45 minutes, and then I'm going to let it go, and then I'm going to come back 45 minutes later, or a day later, or 2 days later, and write for another hour, hour and a half, because that's what works for me. I think a lot of authors, when they first start out, they hear this whole, you have to put yourself on a schedule, and you have to do it just so. That's a bunch of baloney. I personally think we all have our own process. Your process might be to wake up at 2 in the morning, get an idea, and go write for 3 hours and go to work tired. Or your process might be to be on a strict schedule, and that's what works for you. I think it's just so different, And I think new authors kind of fall into that, like, oh, it has to be done this way. Well, no.
The rigidity is the illusion, right? The rigidity is the illusion. The discipline and the consistency, like even if your process is, being not sporadic, but kind of just going with the flow, but that's what you do consistently. I think that's, and it works for you. That's the way to go. I mean, because
6 books later, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's it. It just shows you, like Stephen King talks about all the time, like on writing. It's a great book. He does 6 pages a day, or more. But 6 pages a day, people think like, oh, that sounds like a lot. Some people might think, well, that doesn't sound like a lot at all.
Yeah.
But 6 pages a day, I could do consistently.
I could do 6 pages in about 30 minutes or 45 minutes.
Right.
But I'm a fast writer. And
but do you do 6 pages a day?
No, I don't.
See, and that's his style, and that's what works for him. But that's not necessarily what's going to work for you.
But I also think it also depends. Like if I was like Stephen King, and I could, because I cannot write for a living. I want to, but my sales won't. My royalties don't support that. I'm a small indie author, so. But if I did write for a living where I was home every day, then I probably would write daily. That's another thing, because I'm a working author, and I think maybe from my experience, 95% of authors are working authors. Most authors or writers have a day job, and they write at night, or they write on weekends, or they write when they can.
Yeah.
I think it really depends. Like for me personally, I'm pretty sure that if I could write for a living, I would write probably daily.
Awesome.
But I can't, so now I just write when I can, and I write when it hits me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Carol, hold that thought. I've got to do the little pledge drive thing. I'm going to play it, and we're going to be back in just a few minutes. This is it's about 4 minutes long.
Okay,
so
no problem.
Be back in just a few minutes. Bye. Hey, you're listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. This is WRUU 107.5 FM. I'm Adam Messer with The Adam Messer Show. We talk to authors, artists, and entertainers on my show. And coming up, we're going to talk more about their creative stuff and what they've got going on. So stay tuned to WRUU 107.5 FM. This is the only place on your local radio dial where you're going to hear anything like this show's focus and uniqueness. We love talking with creative people here. During our on-air membership campaign, I'm asking you to support our show and the station by making a donation at WRUU. To help me talk more about this now, please join us on WRUU.org with your donation. This is our annual pledge, and our goal this year is $15,000, which might sound like a lot of money, but it is basically the funds that we need to operate WRUU and to be able to bring shows like this one and others to you. We don't have government sponsorships. There's no commercials. We are all volunteer community radio station here. I'm a volunteer. My son's a volunteer. We love what we do. We love talking with our audience and our listeners and our guests. We actually are Savannah's only community radio station that's independent from other funding, and we're a nonprofit radio station. The reason why I love doing the show is because I just enjoy talking with creative people. I talk to them about their process, about what they're doing, their projects, how they overcame things. And I just love talking with them about it. It's super easy to pledge your support. All you need to do is you can use your credit card or debit card online. It's affordable, and you get to choose the amount. You're in the driver's seat here. So go on to WRUU.org, and you can click on the donate button. WRUU listeners like you totally rock. Seriously, your financial gifts have kept us going for more than 5 years. Your donations in all amounts make the unique and independent radio station that you enjoy. You are wonderful friends of the community radio station with Global Soul. And right now, we're aiming to grow our friendship circle in order to include everyone who totally rocks with us. We know that you can do it, even if you've never given before, or even if you think that your support doesn't make a difference. It makes a huge difference. Everyone who makes a financial contribution is part of the WRU family and friends, and it's just as important to us as we are to you. We depend on your support to keep the great music and news programs like this coming to you. Go to WRUU.org and tell us how much we rock with your pledge of support. And finally, it's super easy to pledge and to donate. Like I said, you can go on to WRU.org and make your monthly contributions, or you can make a one-time contribution. As little as $5 a month is $60 a year. $10 is $120 a year. And $20 is $240 a year. So if you've been a donator or a donor, think about upping your donation. If you're a first-time donor, keep this in mind. We have a serious fans level. So if you give $107.50 or more, or if you pledge the $10 a month or more level, you will get the WRUU Travel Tumbler, which is a 16-ounce hot or cold beverage container with the WRUU logo on it. I'm asking you to act now. Don't delay. Don't wait. This is our annual pledge drive. We only do this once a year. We do other fundraisers throughout the year, but this pledge drive is the only one that we do, and we try to keep it so that our programming is, it's all about you, the listener. So, go on to WRUU.org and click on that donate button right now. And thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. She's going to be getting off at 4, this guest. I'll transition over, I'll introduce you, and just talk about this new segment that we're doing with the Deuce Savannah. I talk about me writing for the Deuce Savannah like all the time.
Yeah, you just lead the way. I'll follow. Yeah.
All right, everybody, we are back, and I appreciate your pledge support. That's how we run things here at WRUU, with your listener support. My guest today has been Carol James Marshall. And Carol, thank you so much for being with us today. We've been talking about your writing and your books and everything. So how are you doing?
It's been great. Yeah, it's been great. It's really interesting.
I want to hear more about that barflies. That kind of real world crazy.
This, barflies. Barflies was just a very poignant part of my life. It was 3 years of bartending, as I said, in the middle of the California desert. Was a little love shack of a bar that was run by a very eccentric lady, and we had a very eccentric clientele. At the same time that I was bartending there, I was bartending at a very posh golf resort. So I had the different spectrum of, I had my bikers and my outlaws in one end at one place, and then on the other place I was doing these full service bars where I'm doing running like an NFL wedding, So barflies was a very interesting part of my life. I was really green when I started bartending, and I like to tell everybody when they read barflies, I learned a lot about people I learned a lot about the depth of character and how not to judge people about certain perspective. One of my favorite stories in Barflies. Oh, and it's not stories; it's nonfiction.
Right.
So, one of my favorites is about one of my most favorite people was this biker named Rosie. And Rosie was a very big dude. I mean, a very large, bald guy with a ZZ Top beard that ran down to his belly, that rode a big fat Harley. And he hardly ever spoke, and he was very menacing looking, but he was the kindest person I have ever met. And he took really
Yeah.
good care of me when I was a bartender. So Barflies taught me a lot about people. I learned a lot about people, and I've taken those lessons from everything that I experienced while being a bartender and carried it forth in life. So those that go on Amazon to look up Barflies or Kobo or whatever, that is 100% nonfiction.
That is so cool. You think about something like that, and that gritty kind of underbelly of society, that people, they do judge people like that. They do look at people and say, oh, well, you see somebody and you stereotype them off the bat, and it's easy to dehumanize people in that
really
situation.
Is. And if you were to see Rosie, like if you were to see him at that point in his life, everybody would have felt like, oh gosh, what's he doing here? Or you would have felt intimidated, or you would have think he was going to rob the place or something. And he wasn't. He was the best, the kindest man. It's all about perspective and experiences. I was 100% green when I started bartending there. I knew absolutely nothing about bartending. It was one of those fake it till you make it type of situations where I got the job. I just kind of faked like I knew what I was doing. And it was the most poignant part of my life. Of course, having children and a family, that's a different kind of poignant. That was my coming of age story. That's what I learned about life.
And you say you were in your 20s when that took place?
Yeah, I was in my 20s. I'm 48 now. I was in my 20s. And just off the top of it, I just wanted to let you know that I started a second memoir now. As you know, I work as a translator, and I started a translation business.
That's so cool. What do you think that people should be able to take away from that story and the book? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I really don't know. I think not to judge people, not to judge people, and not to judge a situation. There's really not a message in there. There's just a message about what I lived through, what I went through, but I don't know. Times were different back then. A lot of the stuff that happened at that bar would be stuff that nowadays I think would be frowned upon. We handled things kind of the old-fashioned way. It was the 90s.
It was pre-social media, right?
Yeah, it was pre-social media, yeah.
Before everybody had a smartphone and a video recorder in their hand.
It was really nothing to be nude at this bar. Like, you know what I mean? We had this thing that if you wanted to put your name on the rafters, you had to get 100% nude and stand on the bar to write your name on the rafters.
What?
And I had men and I had women. And there's no way you could, like, everything that we did at that bar, there's just no way you'd get away with it now.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Just no way. We handled the local sheriff that was in our business kind of, an old-fashioned way. And so I think about it now, there's just, it was such a different time and a different perspective. I mean, I had men naked on the bar writing their names alongside
That's crazy.
kids.
That's
and
crazy.
It was just a really wild place, but it was also incredibly cool.
Yeah.
Incredibly sweet and kind, and people really looked after me because they loved their bar. It was like a cheer situation. They loved that bar, and I was at the helm of the bar, so they really took good care of me.
That's good.
I was never in danger. I never had a bad situation.
Yeah.
It was great. What I was telling you is, I started a translation business and I work as a translator. I'm bilingual. Spanish is actually my first language. And I started a second memoir, and my memoir is going over my translation, my experiences translating. So
that's really cool. And you were telling me before, I think I told you my wife is from Mexico City, right?
Yes.
And so what is your heritage?
My mom is from Sonora, Mexico. So my mom is from Sonora. My dad is actually just from Detroit.
Cool.
My dad was a marine biker. He was on his Harley taking a tour of Mexico.
What?
And yeah.
Met your mom and fell in love, huh?
And that was it.
Wow.
And that was it right then and there.
That is so cool.
I was raised in Los Angeles, and I was raised in Los Angeles and this other part of Mexico. Your wife will probably know, it's called Mexicali. So I spent a lot of my times between Los Angeles and Mexicali.
That's awesome.
And English was actually my second language. I didn't really speak English until about third or fourth grade. And I spent a lot of time in Mexico.
Carol,
and that's one of the things I miss about
I've just really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you so much. I can't believe we have to wrap it up. Where can people find your stuff at?
Yes, I am on Amazon. So you can just go on Amazon at Carol James Marshall. You can go on Facebook to Carol James Marshall. On Instagram, I think, a science fiction horror author on Instagram. And quick shout out for the Warner Robins and the Macon area people that are listening to this, that my Books and Brews event, I will be selling along with 8 other authors at Just Tapped on Macon on October 19th. I wanted to have an event at a bar because of barflies. I wanted people to, I'll be reading from barflies. I'll be selling barflies.
That's so cool. Well, thank you, Carol, for being on the show today.
And expect that email from me. I'm going to tell you how to get those hardcovers.
Awesome. All right, everybody, stay tuned. We're going to have, at the 4 o'clock hour, we're going to have Zach Dennis from the Savannah Morning News. He's the editor, multimedia editor. And we're also going to have Patrick Welsh from the Ailey Temple Terror Plantation. So here's our annual pledge drive.